going to be reading from Japanese Legends and Folklore, samurai tales, ghost stories, legends, fairy tales, myths, and historical accounts by A.B. Mitford. The laying of disturbed spirits appears to form one of the regular functions of the Buddhist priests. At least we find them playing a conspicuous part in almost every ghost story. About 30 years ago, there stood a house at Mitsumi, in the Honjo of Edo, which was said to be nightly visited by ghosts, so that no man dared to live in it, and it remained untenanted on that account. However, a man called Miura Takashi, a native of the province of Oshu, who came to Edo to set up in business as a fencing master, but was too poor to hire a house, hearing that there was a haunted house, for which no tenant could be found, and that the owner would let any man live in it rent-free, said that he feared neither man nor devil, and obtained leave to occupy the house. So he hired a fencing room, in which he gave his lessons by day, and after midnight returned to the haunted house. One night his wife, who took charge of the house in his absence, was frightened by a fearful noise proceeding from a pond in the garden, and thinking that this certainly must be the ghost that she had heard so much about, she covered her head with the bedclothes and remained breathless with terror. When her husband came home, she told him what had happened, and on the following night he returned earlier than usual and waited for the ghostly noise at the same time as before. A little after midnight the same sound was heard, as though a gun had been fired inside the pond. Opening the shutters, he looked out and saw something like a black cloud floating on the water, and in the cloud was the form of a bald man. Thinking that there must be some cause for this, he instituted careful inquiries and learned that the former tenant, some 10 years previously, had borrowed money from a blind shampooer, and being unable to pay the debt, had murdered his creditor, who began to press him for his money, and had thrown his head into the pond. The fencing master accordingly collected his pupils and emptied the pond, and found a skull at the bottom of it. So he called in a priest and buried the skull in a temple, causing prayers to be offered up for the repose of the murdered man's soul. Thus the ghost was laid, and appeared no more. The belief in curses hanging over families for generations is as common as that in ghosts and supernatural apparitions. There is a strange story of this nature in the house of Asai belonging to the Hatamoto class. The ancestor of the present representative 6 generations ago had a certain concubine who was in love with a man who frequented the house, and wished, in her heart, to marry him. But, being a virtuous woman, she never thought of doing any evil deed. But the wife of my lord Asai was jealous of the girl and persuaded her husband that her rival in his affections had gone astray. When he heard this, he was very angry and beat her with a candlestick so that he put out her left eye. The girl, who had indignantly protested her innocence, finding herself so cruelly handled, pronounced a curse against the house. Upon which her master, seizing the candlestick again, dashed out her brains and killed her. Shortly afterwards, my lord Asai lost his left eye and fell sick and died. And from that time forth to this day, it is said that the representatives of the house have all lost their left eyes after the age of 40, and shortly afterwards they have fallen sick and died, at the same age as the cruel lord who killed his concubine. I'd like to read 2 more stories. This is the story of the faithful cat. About 60 years ago in the summertime, a man went to pay a visit at a certain house in Osaka, and in the course of conversation said, "I have eaten some very extraordinary cakes today," and on being asked what he meant, he told the following story. "I received the cakes from the relatives of a family who were celebrating the 100th anniversary of the death of a cat that had belonged to their ancestors. When I asked the history of the affair, I was told that in former days, a young girl of the family, when she was about 16 years old, used always to be followed about by a tomcat, who was reared in the house, so much so that the two were never separated for an instant. When her father perceived this, he was very angry, thinking that the tomcat, forgetting the kindness with which he had been treated for years in the house, had fallen in love with his daughter, and that was Willie." Sorry, they're just all excited and hyper right now. I guess it's just that time of day. "So he determined that he must kill the beast. As he was planning this in secret, the cat overheard him, and that night went to his pillow and, assuming a human voice, said to him, 'You suspect me of being in love with your daughter, and although you might well be justified in so thinking, your suspicions are groundless. The fact is this: there is a very large old rat who has been living for many years in your granary. Now it is this old rat who is in love with my young mistress, and this is why I dare not leave her side for a moment, for fear the old rat should carry her off. Therefore, I pray you to dispel your suspicions, but as I by myself am no match for the rat, there is a famous cat named Buchi at the house of Mr. So-and-so at Ajikawa. If you will borrow that cat, we will soon make an end of the old rat.' When the father awoke from his dream, he thought it so wonderful that he told the household of it, and the following day he got up very early and went off to Ajikawa to inquire for the house for which the cat had indicated, and had no difficulty in finding it, so he called upon the master of the house and told him what his own cat had said, and how he wished to borrow the cat Buchi for a little while. 'That is a very easy matter to settle,' said the other. 'Pray take him with you at once,' and accordingly the father went home with the cat, Buchi, in charge. That night he put the 2 cats into the granary, and after a little while a frightful clatter was heard, and then all was still again. So the people of the house opened the door and crowded out to see what had happened. And there they beheld the 2 cats and the rat, all locked together and panting for breath. So they cut the throat of the rat, which was as big as either of the cats. Then they attended to the 2 cats, but although they gave them ginseng and other restoratives, they both got weaker and weaker, until at last they died. So the rat was thrown into the river, but the 2 cats were buried with all honors in a neighboring temple. And thank you so much for your patience with the dogs. They are just hyper and happy to be alive. Anyway, I wanted to tell you one more story about animals that isn't a ghost story, but it's pretty cool. We're actually going to be talking about Yoshitoshi's 36 Ghosts in the next episode. That is why we are talking about Japanese ghost stories and folklore. Here we go. How a man was bewitched and had his head shaved by the foxes. In the village of Iwahara, in the province of Shinshu, there dwelt a family which had acquired considerable wealth in the wine trade. On some auspicious occasion it happened that a number of guests were gathered together at their house, feasting on wine and fish, and as the wine cup went round, the conversation turned upon foxes. Among the guests was a certain carpenter, Tokutaro by name, a man who, about 30 years of age, of a stubborn and obstinate turn, who said, "Well, sirs, you've been talking for some time of men being bewitched by foxes. Surely you must be under their influence yourselves to say such things. How on earth can foxes have such power over men? At any rate, men must be great fools to be so deluded. Let's have no more of this nonsense." Upon this, a man who was sitting by him answered, "Tokutaro little knows what goes on in the world, or he would not speak so. How many myriads of men are there who have been bewitched by foxes? Why, there have been at least 20 or 30 men tricked by the brutes on the Makai Moor alone. It's hard to disprove facts that have happened before our eyes." You are no better than a pack of born idiots, said Tokutaro. I will engage to go out to the Makai moor this very night and prove it. There is not a fox in all Japan that can make a fool of Tokutaro. Thus he spoke in his pride, but the others were all angry with him for boasting and said, If you return without anything having happened, we will pay for 5 measures of wine and 1,000 copper cash worth of fish. And if you are bewitched, you shall do as much for us. Tokutaro took the bet and at nightfall set forth for the Makai moor by himself. As he neared the moor, he saw before him a small bamboo grove into which a fox ran, and it instantly occurred to him that the foxes of the moor would try to bewitch him. As he was yet looking, he suddenly saw the daughter of the headman of the village of Upper Horigani, who was married to the headman of the village of Makai. Pray, where are you going to, Master Tokutaro? Said she. I am going to the village hard by. Then, as you will have to pass my native place, if you will allow me, I will accompany you so far. Tokutaro thought this very odd, and made up his mind that it was a fox trying to make a fool of him. He accordingly determined to turn the tables on the fox and answered, It is a long time since I have had the pleasure of seeing you, and as it seems that your house is on my road, I shall be glad to escort you so far. With this, he walked behind her, thinking he should certainly see the end of a fox's tail peeping out. But look as he might, there was nothing to be seen. At last they came to the village of Upper Horikani, and when they reached the cottage of the girl's father, the family all came out, surprised to see her. Oh dear, here is our daughter come. I hope there is nothing the matter. And so they went on for some time asking a string of questions. In the meanwhile, Tokutaro went round to the kitchen door at the back of the house and beckoning out the master of the house said, The girl who has come with me is not really your daughter. As I was going to the Makai moor, when I arrived at the bamboo grove, a fox jumped up in front of me, and when it had dashed into the grove, it immediately took the shape of your daughter, and offered to accompany me to the village. So I pretended to be taken in by the brute, and came with it so far. On hearing this, the master of the house put his head on one side and mused a while. Then, calling his wife, he repeated the story to her in a whisper. But she flew into a great rage with Tokutaro and said, This is a pretty way of insulting people's daughters. The girl is our daughter, and there's no mistake about it. How dare you invent such lies? Well, said Tokutaro, you are quite right to say so, but still, there is no doubt that this is a case of witchcraft. Seeing how obstinately he held to his opinion, the old folks were sorely perplexed and said, What do you think of doing? Pray leave the matter to me. I'll soon strip the false skin off and show the beast to you in its true colors. Do you two go into the store closet and wait there. With this he went into the kitchen and seizing the girl by the back of the neck, forced her down by the hearth. Oh, Master Tokutaro, what means this brutal violence? Mother, father, help! So the girl cried and screamed, but Tokutaro only laughed and said, So you thought to bewitch me, did you? From the moment you jumped into the wood, I was on the lookout for you, to play me some trick. I'll soon make you show what you really are. And as he said this, he twisted her 2 hands behind her back, and trod upon her and tortured her, but she only wept and cried, Oh, it hurts, it hurts! If this is not enough to make you show your true form, I'll roast you to death. And he piled firewood on the hearth, and tucking up her dress, scorched her severely. Oh, this is more than I can bear. And with this, she expired. The 2 old people then came rushing in from the rear of the house and pushing aside Tokutaro, folded their daughter in their arms and put their hands to her mouth to feel whether she still breathed, but life was extinct, and not the sign of a fox's tail was to be seen about her. Then they seized Tokutaro by the collar and cried, On pretense that our daughter was a fox, you have roasted her to death. Murderer! Here, you there, bring ropes and cords and secure this Tokutaro. So the servants obeyed, and several of them seized Tokutaro and bound him to a pillar. Then the master of the house, turning to Tokutaro, said, You have murdered our daughter before our very eyes. I shall report the matter to the lord of the manor, and you will assuredly pay for this with your head. Be prepared for the worst. And he said this, glaring fiercely at Tokutaro. They carried the corpse of his daughter into the store closet, as they were sending to make the matter known in the village of Makai. and taking other measures, who should come up but the priest of the temple called Anraku-ji, in the village of Iwahara, with an acolyte and a servant, who called out in a loud voice from the front door, "Is all well with the honorable master of this house? I have been to say prayers today in a neighboring village, and on my way back I could not pass your door without at least inquiring after your welfare. If you are home, I would fain pay my respects to you." As he spoke thus in a loud voice, he was heard from the back of the house, and the master got up and went out, and after the usual compliments on meeting had been exchanged, said, "I ought to have the honor of inviting you to step inside this evening, but really we are all in the greatest trouble, and I must beg you to excuse my impoliteness." "Indeed? Pray, what may be the matter?" replied the priest. And when the master of the house had told the whole story from beginning to end, he was thunderstruck and said, "Truly, this must be a terrible distress to you." Then the priest looked on one side and saw Tokutaro bound, and exclaimed, "Is that not Tokutaro that I see there?" "Oh, your reverence," replied Tokutaro piteously, "it was this and that and the other, and I took it into my head that the young lady was a fox, and so I killed her. But I pray your reverence to intercede for me and save my life." And as he spoke, the tears started from his eyes. "To be sure," said the priest, "you may well bewail yourself. However, if I save your life, will you consent to become my disciple and enter the priesthood?" "Only save my life, and I'll become your disciple with all my heart." When the priest heard this, he called out the parents and said to them, "It would seem that I am but a foolish old priest, but my coming here today has been unusually well timed. I have a request to make of you. Your putting Tokutaro to death won't bring your daughter to life again. I have heard his story. There was no malice prepense on his part to kill your daughter. What he did thinking to do a service to your family, and it would surely be better to hush the matter up. He wishes, moreover, to give himself over to me and to become my disciple." "It is as you say," replied the father and mother, speaking together. "Revenge will not recall our daughter. Please dispel our grief by shaving his head and making a priest of him on the spot." "I'll shave him at once before your eyes," answered the priest, who immediately caused the cords which bound Tokutaro to be untied, and putting on his priest's scarf, made him join his hands together in a posture of prayer. Then the reverend man stood up behind him, razor in hand, and intoning a hymn, gave 2 or 3 strokes of the razor, which he then handed to his acolyte, who made a clean shave of Tokutaro's hair. When the latter had finished his obeisance to the priest, and the ceremony was over, there was a loud burst of laughter, and at the same moment the day broke, and Tokutaro found himself alone in the middle of a large moor. At first, in his surprise, he thought that it was all a dream, and was much annoyed at having been tricked by the foxes. He then passed his hand over his head and found he was shaved quite bald. There was nothing for it but to get up, wrap a handkerchief round his head, and go back to the place where his friends were assembled. "Hello, Takutaro, so you've come back. Well, how about the foxes?" "Really, gentlemen," replied he, bowing, "I am quite ashamed to appear before you." Then he told them the whole story, and when he had finished, he pulled off the kerchief and showed his bald pate. "What a capital joke!" shouted his listeners, and amid roars of laughter claimed the bed of fish and wine. It was duly paid, but Tokutaro never allowed his hair to grow again, and renounced the world and became a priest under the name of Sainin. There are a great many stories told of men being shaved by the foxes, but this story came under the personal observation of Mr. Shomensai, a teacher of the city of Edo, during a holiday trip which he took to the country where the event occurred, and I have recorded it in the very selfsame words in which he told it to me. This is just a brief intro to the 36 ghosts of Yoshitoshi, which are woodblock prints, and these are from the Meiji period in Japan. So I'll be talking more about this in the next episode. Thank you so much for your patience with the dogs wrestling in the background. Hopefully in the next episode I'll be able to have record at a quieter time, maybe in the evening when they're all napping. So I just wanted to get this in for you in November. And remember to keep your flashlights close and your spooky art stories closer. I'll be talking to you soon about the woodblock prints of the 36 Ghosts by Yoshitoshi.